Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Italian Journey. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of the Italian Journey with leather cover, designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Italian Journey is a memoir of travels through Italy taken by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe between 1786 and 1788. Goethe can be considered one of the last and one of the greatest Renaissance men. He was a poet, philosopher, diplomat, scientist, and novelist with many successful works, but unfortunately he is not so well remembered today, except in Germany, where he was born when it was still a part of the Holy Roman Empire, and at the time he died it has transformed into the German Confederation, precursor of modern Germany. Further, Goethe lived between the end of the Age of Enlightenment and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, during the times of great social, political, and economic changes, such as the 7-Year War, the American and the French Revolutions, and the Napoleonic Wars. All these events had an impact on his life and his perception of the world, and the resulting writings he produced influenced many later philosophers and scholars such as Hegel, Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, and also his scientific book Theory of Colors, which I think is a useful read for anybody dealing with graphic arts, challenged and gave an alternative to Newton's ideas about how the human eye perceives colors. What is Italian Journey about? It is an intimate travel with Goethe, and it gives his perspective on Italy when it was a collection of separate and independent states, before it became Italy we know today, a unified country and a popular tourist destination. Basically, it is a travel memoir which gives us a good idea of what it was to travel and be a tourist in Italy in the 18th century, and it offers a general glimpse into tourism before it became tourism. The book portrays the beginning of Europe's obsession with Italy, when gentlemen would take the so-called Grand Tour to further their education and have some fun on the side. It is travel according to the old saying, there is no better education than travel. Nothing can be compared to the new life that the discovery of another country provides for a thoughtful person. Although I am still the same, I believe to have changed to the bones. The travel was a bit different in the old days compared to our modern and civilized tourism, with the packs of rowdy youngsters descending on a town, spending nights drinking and howling at the moon, and then sleeping it off during the day on the beach so they can be ready for another night of rambunctious behavior. I live in Barcelona, so this kind of behavior is pretty familiar to me. A bit of the plot. The book begins with Goethe, who feels overworked, overwhelmed, and socially too present, so he decides to disappear for a couple of years and takes a sabbatical leave, which he dedicates to traveling through Italy. He sets off in a mail coach from Carlsbad, today's Karlove Vary in Czechia, and travels south to Austria, where he passes through Innsbruck and crosses the Alps into the Republic of Venice. And there he visits Verona and Padua and Venice itself, where he observes men's desperate efforts and struggles against nature. Venetians were already working on sea barriers to protect the city from rising tides, but to Goethe the main cause of the frequent floods is not so much nature, but all the trash Venetians throw into the water, which obstructs the drainage. Another interesting episode happened while he was making an artistic sketch of the fortifications. The drawings were taken away from him and destroyed, since people couldn't understand why anybody would want to draw their fortifications unless he was a spy. At the time, Italy was not one country but a collection of independent states with loyalties divided between France, Spain, and Austria, and often at war with each other, so the locals were a bit suspicious of oddly behaving foreigners. After Venice, Goethe goes to Bologna and then the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, with surprisingly short stops in Florence and Siena, perhaps because Goethe was not a big fan of the Renaissance and was anxious to get to Rome. So he passes into the Papal States, where he finally arrives in Rome and settles there for a while. It was Rome that Goethe appreciated the most and where he spent the largest part of his journey. He says, "Nobody will ever make me envious again when talking about Rome because I have been there, and the entire history of the world is connected to this city." I think this other excerpt from the book says it all about how he felt in Rome. The splendor of the objects by which I am surrounded makes me forget myself and carries me as far and as high as my innermost being permits. There is only one Rome in the world. Here I feel like a fish in the water. I have never been so happy in my life as now. But there's also some criticism of the modern architectural aesthetics of the city when he says, "What barbarians left intact, architects destroyed." After a few months' rest, Goethe heads south to the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily, and stops in Naples, which at that time I think was the second most populous city in Europe after Paris, and it made a quiet impression on Goethe as well. He says, "Naples is a paradise where everybody lives in the state of self-forgetfulness, including me. And in Rome, I only wanted to study, and here I only want to live and forget the world, and it is strange to be in a place where everybody just wants to enjoy themselves." Goethe describes the extreme scenery of Naples, with Vesuvius in the background, which in the 18th century was in constant activity and had several eruptions. He climbs the volcano various times and also visits the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum, destroyed by the famous eruption of 79 AD. Later, Goethe sails to Palermo in Sicily and travels around the island to Catania and Messina, which at the time lay in ruins destroyed by a recent earthquake because of what Goethe calls shabby building practices and lack of good stone for construction. But on the positive note, he says, "To have seen Italy without having seen Sicily is to not have seen Italy at all, for Sicily is the clue to everything." I would say it is difficult to define Italy as a whole, because the country is very fragmented and each region culturally is very distinct, so to know one part is not to know the whole. But isn't that the case with many countries thrown together by nothing more than a superficial political project? From Messina, Goethe takes a ship back to Naples and then to Rome for another long stay. There he participates in the Roman carnival, and he vividly describes the images of the rich and famous parading in their carriages and everybody hiding behind a mask, except for the most beautiful women, and also promiscuity practice in the side streets. I lived in Rio de Janeiro for a few years, and these descriptions brought back the memories of the carnival there and how different uninhabited people behave during it, compared to their everyday lives. But for some people there, it was always carnival. After about a year in Rome, Goethe decides to return home, but this time he takes a northwest route and passes through Milan and then crosses back into the German states. And that's where the journey ends. What did I think about the Italian journey? I think the book was great and I enjoyed it very much. Maybe because I am a fan of Goethe and appreciate his work. The book gave me an intimate look into the man who was a philosopher, scientist, artist, and the writer of some great novels, such as Sorrows of Young Werther and Faust. Italian Journey is a glimpse at Goethe during his time off and not working. Well, Goethe was never not working, but on the trip he seemed more relaxed and joyful, as he himself admits. Goethe wrote the Italian Journey 3 decades after completing the trip, but the descriptions of the experiences and the places seem pretty fresh and accurate. Maybe because the base for the narration were his diary entries and letters to his mistress and friends, which are the real meat of the book. Goethe descriptions reflect his gift of precise observation and his never-ending curiosity and search for knowledge and fascination with details. He comments on climate and observes topographic features and what effects they have on the local population. And he compares natives, their looks, habits, and traditions to the people back home, to whom he says, "We must not judge southern nations with our standards." There is a bit of cultural shock, as in the inn he stayed, where he observes that the doors had no locks and the windows were covered with oil paper instead of glass, and when he asked for the place to do his necessities, the owner quietly pointed to the courtyard, which probably was not that rare in 18th century Europe. I think for Goethe the trip was spurred by and a hopeful cure for his midlife crisis, and before he went he had some expectations for the impact the travel would have on his life. On this journey I should certainly learn how to travel, but will I learn how to live? During the trip, we get to see three different sides of Goethe. There is the intellectual who says, "The most decisive effect about works of art is that they carry us back to the conditions of the time and the individuals who created them." And he also collects rocks and botanical samples, observes local customs, and studies the architecture of the places he passes through. Then there's Goethe, the philosopher, who says, "Life is like a Roman carnival, where man is both actor and spectator. And one has to ride as one has to live, first for one's sake, and then for the sake of the few congenial souls." And finally, there's Goethe, the romantic, who shows general interest in women in Rome and later becomes smitten with a young lady in Naples, but to his disappointment he finds out she is engaged. And also at the end of the book, when departing Rome, he admits to having strong intimate feelings for his friend Angelica. Further, Goethe tells us how he feels in Italy. He appreciates the locals' relaxed approach to life, and he himself is happy and content there, and gives the largest credit for it to the Mediterranean weather. "Climate alone makes me want to live here. It is the most important influence on man's well-being. And if there was only one thing I could take with me home, it would be Italian September." I agree, there is no better month in the Mediterranean than September. The seawater has been pleasantly warmed by the summer sun, the day temperatures drop to the comfortable level, and most importantly, the masses of the summer vacationers go back home. Goethe took the tour to get away from work, but he keeps himself pretty occupied by writing plays and learning to paint. And as any perfectionist, he gets pretty frustrated by the difficulties and slowness of his progress. "Artists like to give me lessons because I am quick in understanding, but understanding is not doing." And he blames it on not having time to practice because of constant interference from others. "To my annoyance, I wasted the whole morning with the fools." But on the other hand, he seems to feel pretty accomplished when he says, "4 months spent in Rome and not a moment has been wasted." Goethe also admits to preferring a hermit existence, but tries to break this habit by becoming more social, which I imagine was easier to do in Rome and Naples than back in Germany. His final conclusion about the journey is, "I have lived through the most important period of my life and can hardly recognize the person I was a year ago. It has only been in the last few months that I came to enjoy myself, and everything lies clearly ahead of me. And when I arrived in Italy, I felt reborn. Now I feel re-educated." Which was all he hoped for before venturing out of Germany. And on the sad night Goethe departs Rome, he compares himself to Ovid, a Roman poet exiled from the city by Augustus, and he tries to recite one of his exile poems, but because of the melancholy of the moment, he's not able to do it. To sum it up, Italian Journey is somewhat of a travelogue, but written in classic and pleasant prose. The book takes us back 200 years to Italy as seen through the eyes of a foreign traveler, and allows us to compare how much the opinions about Italy and the Italians have changed over the couple of centuries. I would say the generalizations North Europeans have about South Europe have not shifted much. Another important impact Italian Journey had is that it began the German love affair with Italy, which lasts until today. The previous contact between the two people was limited to the Germanic tribes swooping down to the Italian peninsula to rape and pillage, and they sacked Rome a few times and greatly contributed to the downfall of the Roman Empire. To be fair, it was the Romans first who on a few occasions sent their legions up north to subdue the pesky Germans. It was a bit more complicated than this, but this is not the place to discuss it. Italian Journey can be a valuable guide for people who are interested in history and travel, and can serve as a reference to see how travel has changed over time. But for me, personally, it was the impact the journey had on Goethe and his development, for as he admits himself, the trip was life-changing. There is an old Goethe at the beginning of the voyage, somewhat tired and frustrated, and then there is a new or changed Goethe at the end of the book, heading back home with renewed energy and new ideas and hopes for the future. And besides an intimate look at Goethe, I in general like to read historical first-hand accounts to see how different or similar were the thoughts and perspective of the people in the past from our own. Maybe to see if we have improved as much as we would like to believe, or even if we have improved at all. Perhaps our claim to intellectual superiority is an illusion and a denial of reality to feel better about ourselves. Anyway, if you are curious about any of the things I mentioned, you probably will enjoy Italian Journey. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A naturally tan hide I buy from Tenere in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of leather myself. First I design the cover, and I decide to use the 18th or 19th century painting of a couple of gents seemingly discussing Italian fauna with the imposing ruins of Colosseum in the background, and I thought it nicely represented the narration. This is the bag with the blurb, and inside the front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. and it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read the book. Adios.